My guest tonight is Joseph Atwill. He is a researcher and independent scholar. He's the author of Shakespeare's Secret Messiah and the controversial Caesar's Messiah, the Roman conspiracy to invent Jesus. His website is postflaviana.org. Joe also is a co-host of a weekly podcast that he does with Jerry Russell, right? Jerry Russell's your...
That's right. Yeah, Revolution Radio, every Monday morning at 12 o'clock Eastern Standard Time.
Yeah, and you also write a lot of stuff with him too, right?
That's correct, yeah.
Yeah, that's a fascinating podcast. I highly recommend it. I always make sure I pull down I download a copy of that and listen to it, because you get a whole, I guess you could have an archive there going way back, I guess. At least
that's right. We try to archive all of the podcasts, and Jerry Russell is well informed in areas that are important. He has a background as a clinical psychologist and an electrical engineer, and he was one of the people who worked on big data at the onset when he worked Nielsen. So he comes from a very informed place, and a lot of the areas that we get into, I think, are useful for the citizen to be aware of. So
yeah, you two complement each other well on that show. It's good stuff.
Thanks.
So just want to recommend that podcast. Tonight, I want to talk with you about your research on what's called weaponized anthropology and the creation of the counterculture, as well as the degradation of culture through entertainment and the arts. How do you want to get into that topic?
Right. Well, do you want me to give a summation of how we got here?
Yeah, I want a brief tour through.
Or do you have a specific question?
Yeah.
Well, okay. The article that is probably a good place for people to start is just called "Manufacturing the Deadhead." I wrote this with Jan Irwin in 2014, and it focuses on the Grateful Dead. And makes the case that the Grateful Dead was basically part of a effort by military intelligence inside the United States, specifically the CIA, to bring about an archaic revival. And I mean, when people hear this concept, they find it, almost impossible to imagine. But in fact, if you go through the article, you'll see that we produce primary documents showing that this is exactly the case. And after you've worked through the information, starting with Gregory Bateson in World War II and the development of what is called weaponized anthropology, you then end up in the 50s with this individual, Gordon Wasson. And the beginning of the psychedelic drug movement in the United States is really directly traceable to this individual. You have Huxley and the Doors of Perception, but long before that, and really in terms of getting into the public mind, it was an article that was on the cover of Life magazine, which referenced this trip to Mexico that Gordon Wasson took, and there he had purportedly this wonderful spiritual experience, and Life magazine did an article on it, and then psychedelic drugs just became more and more something that people were familiar with, and then of course 10 years later you have Woodstock. The important primary document that we bring out in the article is the fact that, it represents that the CIA, specifically MK Ultra, paid Wasson to go to Mexico and to do this research. That everything that Gordon Wasson represented in the Life magazine article is a lie. Everything, just an absolute hallucination, to use a term. And so when you see this, the question is, well, what was the CIA doing? There doesn't seem to be any, sort of foreign policy area that this is finding out about or affecting. What is the purpose of it? And it goes back. You can then trace back to the origin of the MK Ultra project, which is found in a letter that Gregory Bateson wrote during World War II. The letter was discovered by Dr. David Price, who is a terrific researcher into the relationship between the science of anthropology and the U.S. military intelligence, a secret relationship that he has uncovered, and highly recommend his work. But using the Freedom of Information Act, he obtained a letter that was written by Bateson during World War II, which described how a superior people can enslave an inferior people. And I'm not making up these expressions. I'm quoting from Bateson's letter. And I'm just going to digress for a second. Bateson is a very important concept. He's a lifetime actor. Bateson is famous as the husband of Margaret Mead, one of the founders of Esalen. He gave LSD to famous people like Ken Kesey, Allen Ginsberg. And so he's seen as this free-spirited person who's interested in spiritual growth, for people. But actually, when you look at his letters, you can see that he was someone who has a very, very dark and evil moral perspective, who was developing science to enslave the populations, right? This is really what he was doing. And so he determined that, and he actually referenced an experiment that was done by the Russians, incidentally, which is quite shocking. But, if you go to the website, the Post-Flaviana website, you'll see an article on Bateson that I wrote, which has the letter and explains that what Bateson and the anthropologist discovered was that if you really want to create a slave state, a stable, functioning slave state, you need to reduce the tension by making the slaves feel that their inferior position is valuable. And to do that, he found the best way was to engender what he called an archaic revival. And that means that they would give praise to the native people when they displayed their ancient traits, the traits from their past. So in other words, this is what the expression, native or archaic revival means. It just means bringing up these elements in the past, the writing, the dancing, the use of drugs, the different cultural aspects that are in the past, and then giving them praise for expressing them. And the reason why this creates less tension in the slave state is that then the technology that the superior people need in order to maintain control, this isn't something that the subjugated people feel jealous about or threatened by, because they are being given praise for embracing their culture, their tradition, right? So when the MK Ultra project was developed by the CIA, we don't know much about this project because all of its records were destroyed illegally by the CIA when they were requested by the U.S. Senate. But we have there are a few documents, and one of them, of course, is this pay requisition for Gordon Wasson for the trip that began the whole psychedelic movement. And so then, seeing that this was what they were engaged in, you can then move forward and you can connect back to Gregory Bateson. Bateson is at Palo Alto, where MK Ultra has one of its centers. And now you can see direct connections into the literature, which helps produce the archaic revival. I'm going to specifically mention Ken Kesey with One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, which has the Native American hero at the end and kind of embraces, in an insane world, you have to be crazy in order to get along, this idea. He was an employee of MK Ultra, Ken Kesey, who received LSD from Bateson, and also Robert Hunter, who was the lyricist and band member of the Grateful Dead, and so this, is another point of the MK Ultra influence of culture. And then if you go into the background of the other Grateful Dead members, you can see there's military intelligence, there's Bohemian Grove, there's a lot of, in hindsight, very clear-cut relationships directly back into military intelligence. And this case, this sort of historical documentation of the background of the original rock idols who are leading the culture into this native revival. And bear in mind that a lot of them almost all of them are wearing kind of primitive outfits. If there's a famous picture of David Crosby and his father, it's in the article that is there on the archaic revival, Manufacturing the Deadhead, and you can see that David Crosby looks exactly like a member of the Lewis and Clark expedition, and he's sitting next to his father, who looks like, well, he is an OSS Annapolis military intelligence individual.
Gray flannel suit and glasses.
Yeah, gray flannel suit. So you can see that, you just have two generations, of military intelligence, basically, and so what really makes the case just overwhelming, and I mean it just becomes absolutely overwhelming, is when you connect that research, the stuff that we show about the Grateful Dead, to what was going on in Los Angeles, because the counterculture really sprang almost overnight in these two areas, where you suddenly have massive amounts of LSD that was available, and a kind of folk rock music that was associated with the people producing the music, who had a brand new look. I mean, if you think of the Doors, the Byrds, the Mamas and the Papas, the Grateful Dead, I mean, their appearance was dramatically different, than had been seen in America before. And so when you connect what can now be shown about the Grateful Dead to the work that a person named Dave McGowan has done in terms of the Laurel Canyon scene, as he calls it, well, suddenly it just becomes impossible, in my opinion, to not recognize that really the counterculture was a project of the government, and the purpose of it was to bring about an archaic revival. And basically, they would promote a primitive appearance, magical thinking, drug use, sex, without marriage, and kind of a return to nature. If you look at people like Jim Morrison or David Crosby, the individuals making up the Grateful Dead, they had this appearance, and I call it basically the Lewis and Clark look, which just occurred overnight. It wasn't something that slowly developed. They just all of a sudden showed up, and so what we've been subjected to is basically is an introduction of an archaic revival to the baby boomer. I think the baby boomer was seen as a problem by the oligarchs in that there was this huge demographic bulge of potentially very smart and threatening people to the oligarchs. Had they gone in a different direction politically, who knows what the nation could have become. But my generation, and I was someone who experienced all of these things, we were hit in two ways, Tim. I mean, we had the Vietnam War on one side, and then we had the counterculture on the other. And that combination just shattered my generation. If you look at what political achievements they had, particularly in terms of actual, creating a higher quality of democracy where the oligarchs would share things more efficiently. I mean, we were just, useless basically. And so, that's the basic thrust of the article, Manufacturing the Deadhead. It shows that the project was very long-standing. That what we saw in the 60s in the United States was actually begun far earlier. basically at the beginning of the 20th century by a person called Edward Bernays, who was the father of propaganda. Bernays is a weird double nephew of Sigmund Freud, who he had hundreds of letters exchanged with. Only a few are known, but Bernays, began most of what you can see in the 60s. You can see as kind of the elements of the counterculture. Integration was really something he began, particularly as a tool of the government. Sexualized media. He's almost completely responsible for this. He's one who put on the first edgy play called Damaged Goods with funding from the Rockefellers. And many other things, feminism. I mean, all of these things, if you look at the elements that make up the counterculture, and so many of them are these, they have these beneficial, iconic places in our mind, feminism, integration, folk rock music. I mean, you think of these things and you would never imagine them as something that would be a tool of enslavement. But the fact is that we need, as a people, to become more alert to exactly how culture is formed and by whom, because all of these things can be weaponized, and they were. I guess you listened to a show I did recently on Ms. Magazine, and I pointed out that Ms. Magazine was basically a CIA operation, another element to break down the family. The feminism that was developed by the CIA was done as part of the archaic revival. The nuclear family, for some reason, I can think of a number of good ones, but I can only speculate in terms of what they were worried about. But it was decided to bring that to an end, and so what they did was they produced a number of cultural forces, and one of them was a version of feminism, which was promoted by Bella Asbog and Gloria Steinem, which was really anti-male, and specifically. And in the show I just did recently, I talked about how they went after the black male, because I think the African American was seen as the weakest link and was basically going to be the leading edge of the cultural avalanche into the abyss. They thought they were the weakest, so they went after them the hardest. And this is why the Great Society programs were designed like they were. And it's a really easy thing for people to see the malfeasance, because the demographic statistics of the African American culture are very well documented from the end of the Civil War up to the beginning of the Great Society programs. And in every single imaginable trait, there was improvement. In other words, they were narrowing the gap in all areas with European Americans. And then the Great Society program began, and all of these attributes turned negative immediately. And this was because primarily the Great Society programs were designed with this funding of single women that was not given to married women, right? So that single powerful force started to break apart the black society. Now, there were other elements to this, but this was a powerful force. And it began, of course, with the Great Society programs. Now, the Ms. Magazine supported this, basically the breaking apart of the black family. It created an article, cover article called Black Macho and the Myth of the Superwoman. And it was a hit piece on the African American male. And you'd have to, read the article to see just how vicious the characterization of the African American male is in the article. But it was written purportedly by this black woman, Michelle Wallace, who then she later admitted that she had been breastfed. That was the term she used. by this individual, another woman who was operating as an editor for Ms. Magazine. And this woman, and her last name escapes me, but she turned out to be the mother of Daniel Pinchbeck, the current proponent of LSD and magical thinking and the, 2012 apocalypse, all of this nonsense. And so, you really get to see a multi-generation malevolence. You get to see, the black male targeted. You get to see middle-class whites targeted. And I also reference the work of a gentleman named Daryl Hamamoto. He's a professor at UC Davis. And he pointed out that the Japanese family had been studied during the internment period in World War II, and that a lot of that anthropologic science, which basically was determining how can a family be shattered, was then the basis of what became the Great Society programs, which he intonates was, basically a designed, weaponized piece of political legislation to shatter the family. And I just wanted to get back to the point, Tim, that this is obviously malfeasance. I mean, there's just no way this can be anything other than an organized evil inside the government, because all of the statistics turned negative at the time the program began, and they never reworked the program. Even though the statistics were all clearly going south in every category, they never decided to change the structure of the program. So that can't be circumstantial. They have anthropologists that could give them, the meaning of this data if they wanted. And so the theory that best explains all this is just that they were getting what they wanted, and so they didn't change.
It was a divide and conquer strategy.
Yeah, well, it was divide and conquer, but it was divide in a particular way. What they really were doing was they wanted to create a moral and intellectual debasement of the African American. That was the idea. And then once they had done that, they would push the white middle class kids into that debased culture.
And they've done that in the past 25, 30 years.
Right, and then you have the rap music. I mean, look how popular rap music has become. This is obviously a debased, intellectually debased genre, and it's infectious in terms of its influence on white American kids. And so what you're looking at is not history unfolding. I mean, you're just looking at the results of a program.
It's degradation. And if you pointed out that you're accused of being a racist or something, because you're
right, exactly, that's it's what they hide behind. But I mean, and this is why. See, this is one of the reasons why when that comes up, which of course is ad hominem, but no problem. Maybe we can accept the charge, but you need to start to move it into the primary documents. The documentation of Gordon Wasson being an MKUltra employee exists. The documentation of Gregory Bateson's developing a weaponized anthropology to create an archaic revival exists. Gregory Bateson's relationship with all of these individuals who were moving the culture into this form exists. There is no way that Bateson's relationship with these people can be hidden. It's documented. Gloria Steinem's employment at the CIA is outed. It's completely vetted. She has admitted it.
That's right. It's not a conspiracy theory. She admits
it. These aren't conspiracy. These are the actual.
Yeah.
These are what platform we have to stand on, in terms of how do we understand this. And so then they say, well, we really want to interrupt the argument. We don't want to address any of the facts, but let's go back to the idea that you're a racist or that you're a misogynist. You hate women. Mm-hmm. You don't like feminism. And these are just red herrings. They're trying to push people. They're trying to intimidate people. They're trying to get people to stop demanding that the that there is an explanation and a review, a hearing that's public, that will make sense out of what happened with MKUltra and with the creation of the counterculture.
The biggest obstacle there is just convincing. A lot of people know about it, but I would still say it's not generally known.
No, it's not at all.
Yeah.
I mean, because you see, mainstream media will not vet the concept. But this is why these shows are so powerful. And I mean, I have to pray. I just cannot praise you enough. And I told you I was listening to some of your interviews before I came on the show, and I just think they're terrific. And and let me tell you something, that this is starting to cut. It's starting to have some power because mainstream media is being shunned. People are realizing that it is fake. They can't trust it. And if you look at what it claims, what it gives as the statistics, they're all in just rapid decline. So I think that Cass Sunstein's statement that we have to find a way basically to stop conspiracy theories from operating and from becoming popular, because otherwise there won't be a functioning democracy. Well, you have to kind of interpret what he says is to mean that basically the alternative media is starting to get some power, and we have to find a way to destroy it. Otherwise, democracy might exist, and the oligarchs won't have control any longer. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's the interpreted, way to look at what Sunstein, his attack on the First Amendment, what it really means. So, Tim, I tell you, we just have to keep it up and keep pushing harder. And people who hear the information, people who listen to your information, people who read the articles that I've referenced, bring up this information. I tell people, one powerful thing to do is just to get a coffee table and set it up someplace that is a public forum possible, like a farmer's market or outside a movie theater, and just start getting people to talk about these things. Mm-hmm. Just put the coffee table up, say, hey, look, hey, First Amendment, I'm here to talk about the political reality of the nation, and see who shows up. See what kind of dialogue can be developed, because, like in the experience I've had, if you get like 5 people to start showing up, wanting to discuss it, then you are no longer able to be intimidated. Say you want to discuss 911, you want to discuss the engineering aspects of the Building 7's collapse. Say that's something you want to. Now, if you're there by yourself, you can be easily intimidated, right? People come by, glance at you, and But if there's 5 of you, and you've actually discussed it, and you all are reasonable people, and you have solid information, it's a force. It can't just be with a glance pushed aside. I mean, this is the small steps we have to make to reestablish democracy in this country, because it's obviously at this point it's just a fake charade whereby we're given a dialectic, we're the Republicans versus the Democrat, but all of the candidates come through the media, and none of them represent anything other than the oligarchs.
Yes. Now it's interesting you mentioned the lifetime actor concept.
Yes, very important for people to get that. Yeah.
Of course, you mentioned Gloria Steinem. Her background is very interesting. She was the recipient of the Chester Bowles Scholarship.
I know. I love that.
Well, that's funny because it was given one time.
Right.
And then, of course, throughout the whole career, she dated Henry Kissinger, this guy Pottinger. He was a Ford and Nixon DOJ official who helped cover up the Martin Luther King assassination, and so she looked at who she hung out with. It's just obviously she was not countercultural. She was
right. I mean, she was a mall of the oligarchs. But the thing is that when it was Nation magazine, I believe, who outed her, and one of the reasons they went after her is because Ms. Magazine put out Black Macho. People were very suspicious of that. Mm-hmm. It didn't seem real to them. They thought it was fake. They wondered about it. They started looking into it. They looked at the Chester Bould Scholarship, and then someone found out she was CIA. She denied it at first, and then, at least this is my understanding, and then because they had somehow they got documentation, she went public. And she created this YouTube video, which, or not, YouTube didn't exist, but she created a video which is available on YouTube. People can look at it. And there she says that, the thing to remember is that the CIA was like really this kind of liberal organization that hip, feminist-minded people like myself would be interested in. Now, you have to ask yourself, is there any way that this individual could be so stupid as to believe that? And I just don't think that lie is plausible, because this was the moment that the CIA was engaged in, among other things, and like things like with the Bay of Pigs and whatnot, with MK Ultra.
Well, Alan Dulles and people like Alan Dulles and Dick Holmes were so progressively minded, right?
Right. Yeah. They couldn't be more. Well, this is the thing: is that if you look at the original CIA leaders, they're all banking lawyers. Donovan and Dulles. I mean, there's two other ones. They're just these are just Wall Street insiders that are obviously representing the financial interests in some way. They're not. I mean, what in the heck? Alan Dulles, for heaven's sakes, is absurd. So, her claim that this was this liberal organization that hip people were involved with is ludicrous. And then it's in a single isolated position, something like the article could be, well, maybe it was just circumstance. It was just unfortunate. It was a bad idea. But then you look at the Great Society programs, and you see the fact that the article supported this. Right? It was used as a prop for it. It was a way to turn culture in the favor of breaking apart the black society. And then you look at the other CIA activity to break apart to break apart white families, right? Because you can now see, I think that the case is overwhelming that, the kind of folk rock LSD late 60s scene, both in San Francisco and Laurel Canyon, were productions of them. And then suddenly the whole picture becomes clear, and you can't really isolate Steinem, in any way that's not malevolent. She suddenly we look at her in a context, and the context is very strong. In other words, these are primary documents, right? This is evidence. You just have, in conjunction with the primary documents, you have this overwhelming circumstantial case of just way, way too many of these people are involved with military intelligence, like Jim Morrison's father being the admiral who was in charge of the Gulf of Tonkin false flag.
Frank Zappa's father, Edward Arsenal.
Zappa's father was involved in chemical warfare and LSD, other things. So, suddenly the circumstantial case, becomes supportive of the primary documents and vice versa. And if this was a court of law, there would just be a guilty verdict almost immediately. You just can't get around it. So this is a real problem for us, because it means that there is malfeasance, that inside the government there is a deep state that has power, right? I mean, it's never been outed. Obviously, it is in control, because if it wasn't, there would have been some exposure to something like as destructive to the citizenry as the Great Society programs and the counterculture for the European American kids in the 60s and 70s. This stuff has never been brought out, and so you can see that this organization has control and resists any kind of democratic opposition, and so we have to look at our nation in a different way. We have to look at it as basically under the control of a group that has gotten the apparatus of power, financial power, military power, political power, and is using it against the citizens.
That's how they control the culture, because in the same way that Edward Bernays organized the Liberty Torches in the 20s,
right?
When feminism was kicking in, all of a sudden Madison Avenue, Hollywood, TV, everything kicks in.
Exactly,
to promote the agenda.
So it's all part of a enslavement process.
The same with the teenager, because in Hollywood, when they created the teenager, was a creation of Hollywood and advertising. I mean, the concept of the teenager being separate, from adults and kids, where when they, Rebel Without a Cause, and those movies came out with a certain
This comes
agenda.
out of nowhere.
Yeah.
And then like I have articles there on Catcher in the Rye.
Yeah, where you, I was getting at the Catcher in the Rye, it's supposed to.
Yeah, and this comes out of nowhere. It has this very intense first-person narrative.
And that's 1951.
Right, 1951, and he was working on it. Salinger was working on it during World War II while he was a member of the OSS, when he was in military intelligence. Can't prove it, but the claim is that he actually was working with Henry Kissinger. He was doing interrogation of French and German prisoners, but he was also, again, this is just speculation, but there is evidence, some evidence that he was involved in Operation Paperclip, which ends up as basically one of the things that brings about at the MK Ultra project.
Yeah, one of the big
influences. So Salinger wrote this weird book. And it has this. It's very, very easy for young people to identify with Holden Caulfield. He seems, like his angst is really something that people can relate to, and it's written in that way. And it just on the surface is very destructive because he's an alcoholic. He, smokes cigarettes. He's kind of very risque sexually, and he's insane. So not exactly someone you want as a role model, but somehow the book becomes very, very popular. And the two things that I show in the analysis of the book is that the book has a not particularly veiled homage to Freemasonry inside it. I mean, I show, that, like, basically, like he starts out, he fails a test, Holden fails a test studying the Egyptians that he had 28 days to study for, and 28 days is the period of time from the, when someone joins Freemasonry until you have the first initiation of the Egyptians, this ancient culture so much. But, I mean, that's pretty, well, that could be circumstance. But then you get into things like Holden starts talking about sleeping in Eli's bed, and the phrase is repeated 4 times. And sleeping in Eli's bed is basically describing one of the levels of Freemasonry. It has to do with the Book of Samuel. I won't go into the stuff because it's really kind of weird and stupid. But the whole book is structured around basically a kind of a hidden way of representing the fact that Holden is going through a Freemason, basically up the level kind of a situation. And then there's this very troubling kind of subliminal pederast relationship that he has with his sister. And I wrote an article with Dr. Jerry Russell, the co-host of the show I do in Revolution Radio, and he agreed with me that this is what's called neuro-linguistic programming. In other words, they're trying to promote pedophilia in the reader, the sex with very young people. And so if you look at the analysis, I think it's very solid, and I don't think a reasonable person would dispute it now that it is basically out and people can. In fact, I've been advocating that people go to their school boards and demand that the book be taken off the mandatory reading list because it's a weapon. The thing is a part of it's part of the archaic revival. It's part of what they were thinking about doing to the American culture post World War II to reduce it in terms of its political capacity, in terms of any kind of political power that the population might have had. They had in mind to take them into a primitive state, into a state where without family, without extended family, without ethnic pride, without all of the things that might unify the people against the oligarchs.
And that was occurring in the cities, too, with urban renewal and the destruction of the urban neighborhood, and the creation of suburbia factored into that.
Yeah. So anyway, so you had, cultural shapers who were malevolent that used weaponized anthropology, weaponized media to take us into this place we are now, where every attribute of democracy is being diminished.
And the weaponized part of the weaponized anthropology is entertainment and media, and that couldn't have been achieved unless until people were dispersed into suburbia, where they lose their ethnic, religious identities, right? Where the opposition to this stuff, particularly with the Catholic Church in Hollywood.
It would have been very difficult, right? So what they did was
because you had the production code, which was a part of the church flexing its muscle, and then
the Catholic Church had a tremendous influence on Hollywood. It had this rating list that was actually something that Hollywood paid attention to, because they were promoting moral behavior in there, and they actually were able to expose Hollywood as evil. They had a rating that was called condemned, or X.
Yeah.
And if you got that rating, the film was dead.
Mm-hmm.
It had no financial future whatsoever. And so now in the post-suburban era, where all of this has kind of evaporated and divide and conquer, then you had this very slowly, culture moves like a giant ocean liner. It's slow. But they were able to turn it in a bad direction, and then you end up finally with things like Miley Cyrus, and she's an important lifetime actor to understand, because if you look at the first iteration of her personas, Hannah Montana, a young, beneficial, positive young girl who has an alter ego as a rock star, right? So the young people, very young children, girls, are watching the show and identifying with her. They become, something that she is something that they're influenced by. Nothing seems wrong. This is, she's just an idol to young people, but because, it's a Disney production, people don't worry about it too much. But then overnight she becomes the Whore of Babylon. Right. And now these very young girls who she's able to influence, and she has this conditioned structure of influence over, they are being taken into the most debased sexual and moral position that's even imaginable, right? She's promoting, there's just nothing that is, beyond her current persona. So this isn't circumstance, right? She is a weapon. She was created, and the first iteration was part of the attack, and the second phase is delivering the blow. And so, the Miley Cyrus is really just a microcosm of really what's happened to us. The first, if you look at Edward Bernays and how he begins feminism and integration, the music idols, sexualized media, it's always very gentle, very, it's under the banner of liberation, getting rid of, inappropriate and kind of square and, traditions. And then it slowly moves into, the 60s, and you have Woodstock, and then it ends up with Miley Cyrus and rap music, right? And these are all cultural points for young people to be influenced by. And, you, at the same time, you're having the financial system basically is becoming just more and more a system of enslavement, right? And, you now have, in the 50s, a regular person could have a male could have a regular job and have a wife and children. The wife wouldn't have to work. And now today, that's just impossible.
Yeah, he had a job to support his family, had the admiration of his family.
Absolutely, so respect. And so yet this has occurred in a period of time where there has been greater technical progress than has ever been made in mankind's history. How is it possible that none of this has benefited the citizen whatsoever. And in fact, the citizen, by every reasonable standard, has retrograded during that period. This can't be circumstance. I mean, this can only occur if, believe me, if there was no constant structure and manipulation of culture to debase financially and morally the citizens. Just the power of the technical improvements would have meant that life would have been just much, much better. Mm-hmm. So really, we're in a system that is being developed to first debase, then enslave, and then finally genocide us.
And part of it also could be a soft genocide, at least at one stage, because what you'll also have in all this is just is birth rates.
Right. Well, we're being assaulted in every way. I mean, there is chemicals in our body which are reducing sperm count dramatically. I mean, if you look at the European male sperm count, it's just off a cliff. The Japanese, same thing. You look at family production, just isn't happening. There's not children in the families that do exist. And then, you're now looking at enforced vaccinations and the glyphosate in all food, all GMO food. I mean, these things are just, there is no way they can be defended. They are destructive, and yet it's virtually, the media is promoting them at every turn. So, there are hopeful signs. I think just as an example, a quiet revolution is going on with organic food because, more and more people are realizing that the stuff that mainstream, food production individuals are is poison. You can't go to McDonald's. I mean, that stuff is poison, and it tastes good, but you're going to be sick and weak and fat, if you eat this stuff, and so it's people are turning away from it to the extent they can, and so this is an area, another great area of revolution is to all of the small gardens that are occurring and the small organic farmers that are occurring. I mean, this is in a response to the malfeasance between big agriculture and the government, and it's also happening in terms of vaccinations and the drugs. I think that a lot of people are realizing that the meds are not beneficial. They come, if you trace them back, they come right out of MK Ultra typically. Things like Ritalin and Prozac. I mean, you're not dealing with a nice trajectory. The big pharma is something that really needs for the public to understand the moral perspective of. Mm-hmm. And vaccinations. It's another thing. There's starting to be a resistance against this. Because think about how powerful this is. The mandatory vaccinations now for the public schools. I mean, if there is malfeasance in the government, they once they have this legal ability to put things into your body whenever they choose to, how dumbed down can they make your children? Mm-hmm. So this is you can see the kind of the battlefields are starting to become clear, and a lot of people are, and thanks to you and shows like yours, are starting to make the turn. They're starting to realize that these are battlefields, and I would even say so far as like the information that the mainstream media is giving to prop up the foreign policies, all of these wars in the Middle East. The latest Arab terrorist boogeyman, this ISIS organization. I mean, there's really starting to be a resistance to the mainstream's explanation as to where the organization came from, as to how it's funded, as to why we don't stop it. Things are in process, and hopefully these as the new media has more power, as more of this documentation gets out, I think there'll be more and more people that are willing to actually actively resist. And so I would hope that the article we referenced earlier, that Manufacturing the Deadhead, be read by people who listen to this, because It contains primary documents that show absolute malfeasance on the part of the government. The other article on Gregory Bateson showing the letters obtained through the Freedom of Information Act. I mean, these are sort of the foundation of a clear-minded citizen. You get to see these actual fingerprints of malfeasance of some organization inside the government that is deep state, that it never leaves. It's always there. It doesn't matter who's in office, it's in power. And so, this is the information we need to have to try to create an effective democracy. Is we need to know that the deep state, whatever it is, it does exist, and we have to resist it. And that's why I think before the show we were talking about things to do, and I really recommend getting DNA testing of all the oligarchs right across the board. We have to know the ethnic and family backgrounds of every one of these individuals, because we want to know what we're voting for one thing. You see, if the Bush family are just an offshoot of the Rothschilds or of the Rockefellers, right?
Or Aleister Crowley.
Or Aleister Crowley. But you see, this is why it's so important.
Yeah.
Because these rumors swirl around, and you don't know how to verify them, but we can. Mm-hmm. We need to create a citizens' DNA database of the oligarchs, financial oligarchs, media oligarchs, and political oligarchs. And then we have to compare them, because in that way we'll know what we're getting. We'll know what is the real background of the secret society, who's in it and who isn't, and what we're voting for. Mm-hmm. So this is something that can be done. Now, I think that they are anticipating this, the oligarchs, because I've noticed that, like, for example, Madonna travels now with a DNA cleanup crew, and she's someone I'd really like to find out her ethnic background and her family background, for example.
Because why was she so successful? I mean,
exactly.
It's hard to look at her music and go, oh, that's good.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's like, where in the heck do these people come from? How do they, out of all the thousands of people who, I mean, people who are, obviously more talented or better looking or whatever, they don't get anywhere, and yet somehow she is this, 30-year icon. Rolling Stones. Keith Richard, he has a biography which shows him manifesting the one eye, mm-hmm. a la, Aldous Huxley. And of course, he wears the skull and bone ring. I saw a documentary about him where he had the deadhead symbol, as on his guitar. These are troubling symbols, all of these, as a package.
You did an interesting take of getting into the music, the idea of weaponized entertainment. And just Dave McGowan did the thing, his research on Laurel Canyon, and right. Others have also done research on the rock scene. Jan Irvin's done a lot on that. There's also Alex Constantine.
Yes,
and does some good research on the music scene. It's corrupt nature. The fact it's all mobbed up, connected to intelligence, and once you realize that, some of these other things aren't too outlandish to accept.
Right.
But okay, we have Laurel Canyon. The idea you promote the folk rock scene, psychedelic music. That's from a political standpoint, it's a strategy of tension. It upsets the middle class, divides the generations. It also marginalizes the anti-war movement, because prior to that, it was kind of clean-cut, academic, respectful, and all of a sudden hippies come on the scene, and all the Archie bunkers react, right? So you have this reaction. It polarizes.
Right.
And so that's
basically, the society is getting torn apart. A political response by the citizen is almost impossible because we're fighting one another.
Yeah, and those who want to respect a decent society, if your daughter's trying to run off to a rock festival, she can get raped in the mud or can take drugs or whatever, you're going to react a certain way to that sort of side, and you're going to choose your side. And as a part of defending respectful society, you're going to support the police, support the Pentagon, support the Vietnam War, support the state.
You got it, brother. I mean, this is exactly right.
Yeah, it's a strategy of tension.
They set up an artificial dialectic because this the gladiatorial pit. I've been talking,
Yeah.
and I want to get. I know we want to talk about the Beatles, but I mean, I want to. Like Europe recently have had this enormous influx of Muslims. Right? They've had this enormous influx, and no one understands it. They go, "What in the heck is going on?" There's millions of these people being brought in. Why? And my answer is, well, they're turning Europe into a gladiatorial pit. They're going to have the European and the Muslims battle one another. And they will, initiate that with a series of, horrible false flags. They'll collapse the financial structure. There'll be very little food, and then they'll let these people just fight it out.
Yep, and they'll all blame each other. There's Kelly Greenhill wrote a book called Weapons of Mass Migration.
Yeah,
and it lays out the strategy. It's not even written critically. She's just pointing out as an effective strategy for statecraft or geopolitics.
Exactly. and when you couple that with the statecraft, the technical expertise with malevolence, when you have a deep state secret society that controls the apparatus of government, now you have real trouble for the citizen. Because now the immigration is being done in a way to basically to create this gladiatorial pit.
Yeah, and of course the immigration itself isn't natural. It's born out of all these wars that are conjured up, right? You wouldn't have this problem.
Of course. Well, in my opinion, there's no way there would even this group, the Muslims, would even come into Europe at this time without basically being brought there by the government, by the EU government, because they wouldn't have both the legal capacity to make this move, nor the financial or physical. And how would they do it? So something is going on that's sick. And my explanation is that you're having all of Europe is going to be turned into a gladiatorial pit, because I do think that we're at risk of the financial system collapsing. And when it does collapse, you'll have martial law, but you'll also have, desperate people with not enough food. And then if you have these ethnic scapegoats, and with particularly when each side thinks the other one is, the problem, well, then you've just got a really wonderful spectacle for the oligarchs, don't you?
Well, listen, I have you a long time. I'm going to let you go.
Hey, Tim, it has been a real pleasure. And I just, one last thing, I just want to thank you for your show. It's really righteous, brother, and keep up the good work.
I want to thank you for spending so much time with me tonight.
That's a pleasure.
And I'd like to have you back again sometime.
Anytime, I'm always available, and really any way I can support you, I will.
Okay, thank you. And again, your stuff is if
you want to look at the books, go to CaesarsMessiah.com. You can buy my books. My books are also available at postflaviana.org. I answer questions about Christianity and Shakespeare at CaesarsMessiah.com, and at postflaviana.org I take on the modern stuff, the Beatles and MK Ultra and stuff like that. And Monday morning on Revolution Radio, Dr. Jerry Russell and I do a show called The Secret Society Revealed, and we take callers in case anybody's interested. Always happy to talk.
And it's usually about 2 hours, right?
Yep.
Yeah, so you cover a lot of ground on those talks. Great. Well, listen, thank you, and listen, I wish you a Happy New Year.
Okay, you too, Tim.
We'll talk again in the New Year.
All right,
Thanks.
Yeah, hope to. Bye-bye.
Take it easy. Bye-bye.